J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy is one of the most impactful fantasy stories of the modern age. With loads of well-developed characters, in-depth world-building, and an epic battle for Middle-earth, The Lord of the Rings has essentially become the standard for what a high fantasy tale should be like.
It's a horrid, fat, horrid.
Peter Jackson's film adaptations have brought the story of the One Ring to an even broader audience, and the time has come for us to rank the characters on the scale of morality. Bust out your extended editions and get comfortable because we have a very long journey ahead of us. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Lord of the Rings: Good to Evil. And just to clarify, we're only looking at the characters' actions from the films, so for all intents and purposes, their characterizations from the books are irrelevant to this list. We also won't be including any characters or events from the Hobbit trilogy. With all that out of the way, let's get started.
You shall not pass!
As usual, we'll be starting with the good and working our way down into the evil, starting with the most pure. These characters are the good, and I think most of us can agree that the medal for most good character goes to Samwise. A hobbit of humble origin, Sam lived a simple life in the Shire as Frodo's gardener and best friend for much of their lives. Before the events of Fellowship, he doesn't aspire to do much more than talk to the girl he likes at Bilbo's party. After Bilbo's departure, Gandalf catches Sam dropping eaves on his and Frodo's conversation about the One Ring and decides to give him the job of protecting Frodo on his journey.
I've thought of a better use for you.
From that point on, Sam makes it his duty to guard Frodo every step of the way to Mount Doom. We can't even begin to count the times that he saves Frodo's life. He follows Frodo when he sets off to Mordor on his own, almost drowning to catch up with him, defeats Shelob, and rescues Frodo from the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and carries Frodo up to the top of Mount Doom, even after Frodo has essentially betrayed him by trusting Gollum instead of his own best friend. Sam is also correct about Gollum, seeing him as the evil mongrel that he is.
Let's just tie him up and leave him.
Sam also completely rejects the temptation of the ring, even after becoming its bearer for a short period of time. He shows great feats of bravery, determination, and most of all, a fierce and undying loyalty to his friends. This hobbit is living proof that there is still good in the world, and that it's worth fighting for.
Don't you let go.
Is Samwise the Brave the true hero of the story? Yeah, probably. In second place, we have Aragorn. Of every member of the Fellowship, he is the one I would most want by my side, whether on a journey or in battle. He cleverly deceives the Nazgul and Bree, and saves the hobbits from the Ringwraiths later on at Weathertop. He realizes that although the Fellowship was created to help Frodo reach Mordor, the ring is his burden to bear, and allows him to set off on his own.
Frodo's fate is no longer in our hands.
He consoles Boromir as he dies and regroups Legolas and Gimli to rescue Merry and Pippin from the Uruk-hai. Aragorn is cool-headed, courteous, and careful, always planning out his moves beforehand and making allies everywhere he can, whether it be the riders of Rohan or entire undead armies.
Fight for us, and regain your honor.
He's clearly the best organizer and strategist of the entire team, which makes sense because uniting all men under the flag of Gondor is literally in his bloodline. Who else could win not one, not two, but 3 battles against the largest army in Middle-earth while hopelessly outnumbered? He also came up with a plan to keep Sauron's eye fixed upon the Black Gate while Frodo destroys the ring, even though Gandalf doesn't believe it will work.
You will not take the bait.
Though Boromir may give him a run for his money, there is no better swordsman on the battlefield. Aragorn also stays completely loyal to his beloved Arwen during this time at war, even when Éowyn falls in love with him. Some might consider the fact that he rejects his responsibility as king for most of his life as a significant flaw, but this is not unique to him at all. Gondor has been ruled by stewards for generations, and Aragorn is the first rightful king in centuries to assume the throne. And yet, he still remains humble enough to acknowledge the hobbits as the heroes that they are, saying, "My friends, you bow to no one."
You bow to no one.
Overall, an incredible man who is probably the only one in Middle-earth worthy to rule over the race of men. Now, the bronze medal for most good character in Lord of the Rings goes to the most iconic wizard in all of cinema, Gandalf the Grey, or White, depending on the film. If not for Gandalf, Frodo and the One Ring would have never made it out of the Shire. He immediately notices the influence that the ring has on Bilbo and persuades him to leave it to the young Frodo before setting off on his final adventure.
You want it for yourself!
He then discovers the true origin of the ring and sends Frodo off on his journey to Rivendell, setting the whole story into motion. Unfortunately, he couldn't predict the betrayal of Saruman and spends some time trapped on the top of a tower. After making his great escape, he reunites with the hobbits in Rivendell and explains the danger of the ring to the Council of Elrond and shuts down any idea of using its power against Mordor. His initial travel plan for the Fellowship ends up failing thanks to Saruman almost bringing a mountain down onto our heroes, and Moria doesn't really work out the way he wanted it to either, although we do see a full display of both his power and determination in his fight with the Balrog, dueling the beast for over a week and eventually returning to the world as Gandalf the White.
I am Gandalf the White.
Gandalf shows up to rescue the heroes more times than anyone can count, but let's give it a try. He saves Theoden from the corruption of Grima Wormtongue, brings the Riders of Rohan to turn the tide at the Battle of Helm's Deep, prevents the Nazgul from tearing apart the Riders, rescues Faramir from his father's attempt to burn them both alive. I'll stop there, but I could certainly go on. He seems to be one of the few people who actually understand the dangerous power of the ring and tries to steer everyone away from its temptation. However, for as wise as he is, Gandalf very often runs away from the people he's supposed to be protecting to do something else. He's certainly a busy mage, but this leaves his companions and the ring vulnerable on many occasions. But to be fair, he does always leave to do something very important, and comes back when he's really needed, even though he cuts it a little close sometimes. To quote him, "A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to."
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins.
And this isn't as big of a complaint, but Gandalf can be a bit of a jerk sometimes, particularly to Pippin.
Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
Now granted, Pippin does screw up, like a whole lot, but it's never done with any malice. I just think he should go easier on the poor hobbit, which thankfully he does in the end. All that said, Gandalf is an unquestionably good character with a well-deserved reputation for heroism. Next up we have the Shield Maiden of Rohan, Éowyn. Strong and fearless, Éowyn has the heart of a warrior and wants to defend against the orcs alongside her male companions. However, her uncle, Theoden, doesn't want her anywhere near the battlefield and forces her to stay away from the front lines.
I can fight!
No!
She obeys her uncle's orders and guides the people to Helm's Deep, which shows that she places her own duty before personal glory. She's incredibly kind to everyone, even Gimli, although she sticks it to Wormtongue and doesn't fall for his poisonous words.
Your words are poison.
She's the only one who believes in Merry's ability and desire to fight in battle, largely because she empathizes with him and carries the Hobbit into battle alongside her. During the Battle of Pelennor Fields, we see her do what she's trained for her whole life. She slays columns of orcs, defends the men of the West from invasion, and in a combined effort with Merry, gives Sauron's most powerful servant, the Witch King of Angmar, a good ol' stab in the face.
I am no man.
Though her uncle forbade her from fighting, she comforts him and mourns him as he dies from his wounds in battle, showing that she loves him like a father. Ultimately, a world-class heroine who can fight alongside any man, hobbit, or wizard. Can't cook to save her life though. The best archer in Middle-earth, Legolas, is next. In battle, he pulls off some of the most impressive feats in the entire trilogy, namely taking down a league of orcs, and an elephant using only his arrows.
That still only counts as one!
He cares deeply about his companions and doesn't seem to show the same distaste for dwarves as the other elves do. At least, not for long after he meets Gimli. He protects Gimli after Éomer threatens to decapitate him, even when about 50 spears are all aimed at our heroes. His elven abilities certainly come in handy, such as when he treks Merry and Pippin across the entire countryside. Legolas is very rational and calm. Like Aragorn, Aragorn and refuses to leave his side even when he travels into the City of the Dead to recruit the Ghost Army. We see his relationship with Gimli develop from simple travel companions into a long-lasting friendship with just a touch of friendly competition in battle, whatever makes you more effective at killing orcs. Next up is the loyal servant of Gondor, Faramir. It's safe to assume that Faramir has probably had a rough life, growing up in the shadow of his older brother and being neglected by his father.
You wish now that our places have been exchanged.
Despite this mistreatment, he stays loyal to Gondor and fights valiantly in every battle he takes part in. He takes action in defending his country while his father sits on the throne in despair and does nothing. While Faramir initially intends to deliver the ring to Gondor and use its power against the enemy, he abandons this plan once he sees the Nazgul try to take the ring from Frodo. After this, he sends the hobbits on their way to Mordor and allows them to fulfill their quest.
If you let them go, your life will be forfeit.
It takes a lot of strength to be able to bear the responsibility of protecting Minas Tirith, especially after his brother's death, while simultaneously dealing with his insane father who tries to burn him alive. He may not be the fighter that Boromir was, but Faramir is just as strong, maybe even stronger in his own way. We're gonna place Gimli just a bit lower than Legolas. We have to admit he's just as good on the battlefield and just as loyal to his companions as Legolas is. But what knocks him down a few points is the fact that he has trouble setting aside his dwarven pride most of the time. He insults Haldir for not being hospitable towards the Fellowship, which is very hypocritical.
The legendary courtesy of the elves.
He does have a softer side though, as seen when he mourns the dwarves of Moria, as well as his interactions with Éowyn. You just gotta love him.
What's happening out there?
Gimli is many things: arrogant, hot-headed, and the most heroic dwarf in all of Middle-earth. Plus, he's a natural sprinter.
We dwarves are natural sprinters!
The Elven Queen, Galadriel, is next. She brings the Fellowship into her home after they escape from Moria. She is kind and wise, as seen when she comforts Gimli over the loss of his dwarven family under the mountain. Galadriel also allows Frodo to see a glimpse into his future, after which Frodo offers to give the ring to her. In a terrifying display of power, she shows Frodo what would happen if she were to take it. Thankfully, she rejects the ring and convinces Frodo that this is his burden to bear, which she can relate to because she is also a ring bearer.
This task was appointed to you.
She gives Frodo a phial of magic light, which he and Sam later use against Shelob. And during that scene, she appears as a vision to reinvigorate Frodo's will to carry on. In the darkest moments, the Lady of Light shines through as a beacon of hope. Up next, we have Arwen. When she's first introduced in Fellowship, she catches her beloved Aragorn off guard as he attempts to stymie Frodo's wound. She warns him of the Nazgul following him and volunteers to take Frodo to Rivendell, as she's the faster rider.
I do not fear them.
On the way to the elves, the Ringwraiths catch up with her, but she's able to call upon the spirits to wash them down the river. If not for Arwen, Frodo likely wouldn't have made it past the first couple days of his journey. After rescuing the Ringbearer, Arwen spends most of her time in Rivendell arguing with her father about Aragorn. We see that she is very conflicted about waiting in Rivendell for a man who may not return from war, but Elrond has not been telling her the whole truth. Arwen sees a vision of her true future with Aragorn while on her way to leave for Valinor and immediately turns back.
You saw there was a child. You saw my son.
She loves Aragorn so much that she is willing to give up her elven immortality and live out the rest of her days with him and their son. For rescuing Frodo and her undying love for Aragorn, she earns her spot among the heroes. Back to the hobbits, we have Merry. Though you could argue that Merry displays the least heroism of all the hobbits, he does have some very positive character traits. He's a good straight man between him and Pippin, and he's very good at comprehending the situations that he's in, such as when he realizes that Strider is going to be moving the hobbits too quickly for second breakfast. He's also incredibly brave, as he's eager to join the battle for Middle-earth. Thankfully, Éowyn gives him that chance when no one else would.
To battle. To battle.
Although he can be pretty mischievous, like when he and Pippin steal Gandalf's fireworks or the farmer's crops, he becomes a courageous warrior by Return of the King. In the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Merry stabs the Witch King, saving Éowyn and giving her enough time to deal the final blow. Just below Merry is his best friend Pippin. As I mentioned earlier, Pippin definitely screws up a lot. He draws the attention of everyone in the Prancing Pony to Frodo when they're supposed to be hiding, drops the skeleton into the well, which alerts the orcs, and the Balrog to their location in Moria, and touches the Palantir, which almost allows Sauron to penetrate his mind. These actions would definitely make Pippin seem like an absolute idiot, however, Pip definitely makes up for his mistakes. He comes up with the idea to show Treebeard the destruction that Saruman is inflicting on the forest, which leads to the Ents destroying Isengard. He saves Gandalf from a stab in the back, and he rescues Faramir from being burned alive. It's also clear that he deeply cares about his friends, as he almost breaks down at the thought of never seeing Merry again while leaving for Gondor.
We'll see each other soon.
Pippin may be a fool, but he remains a kind-hearted and hopeful hobbit in a time of war. And now we finally get to the protagonist, Frodo Baggins. Frodo definitely deserves a lot of credit for what he does in the story. He shows an ability to be cunning when he evades the Nazgul twice on the way to Bree, and when he solves the riddle of the door so the Fellowship can enter Moria.
What's the Elvish word for friend?
We can see from his interactions with Bilbo, Sam, Gandalf, and the others that he does truly love and care about his friends and family. Of course, as the Ring-Bearer, his story is tied to the One Ring. Though he initially tries to reject it, Gandalf and also the Ringwraiths convince him that he needs to be the one to take it. Once he reaches Rivendell, Frodo willingly volunteers to take the ring to Mordor, along with 8 others.
I will take the ring to Mordor.
By the end of Fellowship, Frodo realizes that no one else can bear the burden of the ring, and that if the Fellowship was to stay together, the ring would corrupt each and every one of them. His decision to leave is actually very selfless, as is Sam's decision to stick by Frodo's side.
I'm going to Mordor alone.
As we move through the films, we see the heavy toll that Frodo's duty takes on him, leading to his interactions with Gollum. Although Sam wants to get rid of him immediately, Frodo takes pity on Gollum as he empathizes with the creature and thinks Gollum is the only other person who could possibly understand the burden that Frodo carries with him. It makes sense that he would want to keep Gollum to use him as a guide, and even pity the creature, but siding with a corrupt monster instead of his lifelong best friend?
Can't do this by ourselves, Sam. Not without a guide.
Not even the burden of the ring is a good excuse for that. Seriously, dude, this thing is very overt about wanting to kill you and take the ring for himself, yet you choose to believe him over the guy who almost drowned himself just to stay by your side.
Go home.
Maybe it's because Sam is such a pure character that I have a hard time forgiving how Frodo basically betrays him in Mordor. Nevertheless, Sam returns to rescue Frodo once more to make the final trek up to Mount Doom. Sadly, after months of resisting its temptation, Frodo succumbs to the power of the ring just before he casts it into the fire. If not for Gollum's insatiable lust for his precious, we may have had another repeat of Isildur's mistake, except this time the Nazgul probably would have caught Frodo and quickly disposed of him. At the end of the day, Frodo is certainly a flawed character, as all well-written heroes are, but I doubt that there is anyone else in Middle-earth with enough willpower to carry the ring for as long as he did.
I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee.
He has strength beyond strength, and he's a hero that will forever be remembered throughout the lands. Moving on to King Theoden. When we first meet him in the Two Towers, he has been corrupted by Saruman and Grima Wormtongue, leaving Gandalf the job of bringing Theoden back to his senses. Unfortunately, the real Theoden returns to find his son dead from battle.
No parent should have to bury their child.
And we can assume that this is one of the reasons Theoden doesn't want his niece to fight, as he could not bear to lose another child to war. Though he is a bit stubborn and does not want Rohan to suffer any further, Theoden does play a vital part in the war. He's fairly pessimistic before engaging in most battles, although it's not without reason because he's usually outnumbered. But Aragorn proves to be inspiring enough to rally the king and his soldiers. By the end, Theoden prepares to ride into battle to defend his home no matter the numbers, showing his courage and loyalty to his men. He even shows forgiveness to Grima, who poisoned the king's mind for who knows how long, and asks him to leave Saruman behind.
Come down. Be free of him.
Though he wants to keep Eowyn away from battle, he never discourages her from helping and places her in charge of leading the people while he's away. In his final moments, Theoden tells his niece to carry on without him, and passes into the afterlife.
You have to let me go.
A noble warrior and a good king. Rest in peace. The Lord of Rivendell, Elrond, is next. Elrond has been around long enough to know the wickedness of the One Ring, as he was a leader in the first battle of the Black Gate. He watches as Isildur cut down Sauron, but failed to destroy the Dark Lord by choosing not to destroy the Ring of Power.
Destroy it!
It's understandable why he wants Rivendell to stay out of the affairs of men, as he has seen their greatest failings. However, he still saves Frodo's life and convenes the council to decide the ring's fate. Without Elrond, there would be no fellowship, so he definitely plays an important role in the story of the ring. He's a realist, and he wastes no time in explaining the threat of the ring and how it must be destroyed.
The ring must be destroyed.
His relationship with Arwen is probably the most complicated part to judge about his character. Obviously, no father wants to see his daughter die, which would be inevitable if Arwen chooses to be with Aragorn. He lies because he does not want Arwen to give up her immortality for him when he may not even return from war.
The life of the Eldar is leaving you.
Clearly, Elrond does this out of love for his daughter, but in a way, it's very manipulative. She should be able to choose her own path in life, and if she chooses Aragorn, then that is her decision to make. Ultimately, he does decide to let his daughter go, and gives Aragorn a gift to ensure that he returns from war: the Blade of Anduril. And now, to the final member of the Fellowship, we have Boromir. As a warrior, he is one of the most successful in battle, defending his home nation of Gondor with patriotic pride countless times. Loved by his countrymen and his father, Boromir is sent as Gondor's representative to Rivendell. Once at the City of the Elves, he scoffs at the idea of Aragorn being heir to the throne of Gondor and immediately shows his desire to take the ring and use it against Sauron.
Why not use this ring?
Unfortunately, this is a desire that never really goes away, culminating when he attempts to steal it from Frodo. It's a testament to how evil and destructive the ring truly is, as we know that Boromir is a good man deep down. He immediately regrets his actions and cries out in sorrow after realizing what he's done. Not long after, Boromir dies a hero's death defending Merry and Pippin. As he lay dying, he repents for all of his wrongdoings, including showing disrespect to the true king of his homeland.
I would have followed you, my brother.
Though he was favored over Faramir by Denethor, Boromir loved his brother very much and tried to elevate him as much as he could, as shown in a flashback that was cut from the Two Towers theatrical edition. He even reprimands his father for treating Faramir so horribly.
You give him no credit, and yet he tries to do your will.
We would give him a much higher spot if not for his initial arrogance in Rivendell and trying to steal the ring from Frodo. Even still, we sort of have to count the latter as a necessary evil because the Fellowship would have been destroyed itself if it didn't dissolve when it did. Next up, we have the Guardian of the Forest, Treebeard. When we first catch a glimpse of him, he seems to be just a regular tree in the forest, but I assure you, he is no mere tree. As Pippin unknowingly climbs up to escape the orc that plans on eating him and Merry, Treebeard awakes and sort of saves the two hobbits. He initially believes them to be orcs, even though he literally steps on one and it looks nothing like the hobbits. After deliberating with the other Ents of the forest, he decides that they are not orcs, and also that the Ents have no business joining the war. Merry is very discouraged by this, especially because the Ents probably took several hours to discuss these matters. But thankfully, Pippin has the brilliant idea of telling Treebeard to take the hobbits back to their home through Isengard. Once Treebeard sees the destruction that Saruman has caused and realizes that Fangorn will die if he doesn't act, he calls upon all the Ents to march on Isengard. Treebeard secures a swift and incredible victory for our heroes, so he earns a spot on the good tier. Let's briefly talk about Éomer. He is the first person to realize that Grima has poisoned Theoden's mind, but he's too late to do anything before Grima has him banished. Despite his exile, he remains loyal to the king and retains command of the Riders of Ron. hunting down the incoming Urkai horde and indirectly saving Merry and Pippin in the process.
My company are those loyal to Rohan.
His most notable display of heroism is showing up with Gandalf at Helm's Deep to turn the tide of battle, saving his people from the invading orcs. Éomer also leads his men alongside Theoden during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. He ranks a bit lower than the others simply for how he ridicules Merry for wanting to join the battle.
I do not doubt his heart, only the reach of his arm.
You are vastly outnumbered, man. You need all the help you can get. Still, he's a courageous warrior, a loyal servant to the king, and a protective brother. And of course, we have to mention Holleder. I'll admit, he definitely doesn't make the friendliest first impression.
It's so loud, we could have shot him in the dark.
But it's fair for him to be wary of a bunch of armed strangers roaming the sacred forest, which is home to two angelic elven monarchs. He tries to stop the Fellowship from traveling further into Lothlorien after sensing the ring that Frodo is carrying, but Aragorn does eventually persuade him to let them pass. In the Two Towers, a legion of elves show up to protect the people of Rohan at Helm's Deep, led by Haldir, who gives his life in the ensuing battle. Without him, they may not have been able to hold out in Helm's Deep until Gandalf arrived with reinforcements. With that said, that's it for the good characters. Now we move on to our surprisingly short list of characters who fall in the gray area. And first up, we have Bilbo Baggins. I know it's pretty controversial to put him all the way down here, especially since we aren't counting his appearances in the Hobbit trilogy, but he might still be down here even if we did count those films. Obviously, we don't think Bilbo is a bad person by any means. He adopted Frodo and took care of him as his own after the young Hobbit's parents died, and he very clearly loves his nephew. Bilbo meets up with Frodo in Rivendell and gifts him the Mithril Vest and his sword Sting, both of which save Frodo's life multiple times. Bilbo's main grievance comes from his love for the One Ring, which remains consistent even after he's given it up. He accuses his very old friend Gandalf of trying to steal the ring for himself, even though he's trying to free Bilbo of its curse.
Trying to help you.
Gandalf basically has to scare him into giving up the ring. We also see him try to snatch the ring from Frodo in Rivendell, and even as a senile old hobbit at the end of Return of the King. The ring is still on his mind. Even though he gave it up, that corruption still lives within him.
Should like to have held it one last time.
Like Frodo's wound, it will probably never fully leave him. It's also not like he was unaware of the ring's corruptive power, because he knows of the creature Gollum and how he lusts after the ring. I'm just saying that I would be very skeptical of a magic ring that turned people completely invisible and pulled them halfway into a different realm. Still, even though the ring had a grip on him for much of his life, he clearly cares for those close to him. Moving on, we have the Army of the Dead. I would consider these guys to be the true neutral of the series.
Now you must die.
When they were alive, they fled from battle after pledging to fight for Gondor in the war against Sauron, and in an act of vengeance, Isildur cursed each one of them to remain tethered to the mortal world. Aragorn is quite skeptical about recruiting them, but Elrond assures him that they will obey the true king of Gondor. That plan doesn't really work out, but luckily Elrond also gives Aragorn a sword that can hurt ghosts. So after the dead men try to attack our heroes, Aragorn basically says, "You're gonna fight for me, or I'm gonna kill you all again."
I am Isildur. Fight for me.
He also promises to release them from their bond if they fulfill their task in death that they failed to in life. They accept and proceed to cut down a legion of orcs on the coast of Gondor. Afterwards, Aragorn stays true to his word and releases them from their ties to this world.
I hold your oath fulfilled.
Because they were traitors in their past and only want to help themselves in the present, we can't place these oathbreakers any higher than neutral. And finishing off our gray area is Isildur. One might think that the first man to march on the Black Gate and defeat the Dark Lord Sauron would be ranked a bit higher, but he's down here for a pretty good reason. Given the opportunity to destroy the ring, and thus Sauron once and for all, he refuses and claims it for himself. This guy succumbs to the power of the ring after holding it for just a few minutes. That's a sign of being easily corruptible. However, from what we see, he doesn't actually hold the ring in the same regard that Gollum does. Nor do we know if he actually uses it in battle. Nevertheless, he is the reason that Sauron is able to return thousands of years later and almost conquer Middle-earth again. Way to undo your own achievements, man. And with that, we move on to the morally corrupt, the ancient monstrosities and the dark lords of the world. These are the bad and the evil. Kicking off the bad characters is Grima Wormtongue. We don't know exactly how long Saruman had control over Theoden's mind, but Grima is the one who maintained the spell and was the de facto ruler of Rohan during that time. He tries to eliminate anyone with power who is close to the king so that they don't realize what he's up to. Éomer definitely catches on to his plotting, but Grima sends him away before he can tell anyone about Grima's allegiance to Saruman.
You see much, Éomer, son of Éomer.
After Gandalf casts Saruman out of Theoden's head, the king exiles Grima, who goes crawling back to his master. We see the mistreatment that Grima suffers under Saruman, which kind of begs the question as to why he chose to follow the White Wizard in the first place. In a scene that was shockingly cut from the theatrical edition, we see Theoden plead with Grima to leave Saruman's side and return as a man of Rohan. Fed up with the abuse, Grima stabs Saruman repeatedly until Legolas shoots him in the chest, leaving Saruman to fall off the tower and impale himself on a wooden spike. Though he'd already lost most of his power, taking out Saruman was something that definitely needed to be done. Okay, let's talk about Gollum.
Must have the precious.
Now, I know there are definitely some people that would argue Gollum doesn't deserve to be grouped in with the evil characters because there are some scenes that show him being very conflicted and struggling with the two personalities inside of his head. And to that, I say no. First of all, just because there is one personality that wants to kill the hobbits and one that doesn't, the quote-unquote good side of Gollum still wants to take the ring for himself at the end of the day.
Where would you be without me? Ellen.
There is no way that any of Gollum's personalities would have let Frodo destroy the ring, and the outcome would have been the same whether or not Gollum let his darker side overtake him. Second, Gollum's darker side is considered the mastermind between the two personalities, and it seems like he has control of the steering wheel a majority of the time. You know, the side that follows Frodo across the world like a creepy stalker for months, and the side that tries to bring the hobbits to Shelob. The side that tries to strangle Frodo on Mount Doom, and the side that bites Frodo's finger off to get the ring. There are also some people who draw a distinction between Smeagol, the hobbit that he once was, and Gollum, the creature that he is now. Whether or not you consider them separate entities, Smeagol was still just as bad as Gollum is now.
Precious. Will be ours.
Smeagol literally murders his best friend after just seeing the ring for a few seconds. I mean, he hadn't even held it yet. We'll give him some credit for getting our hobbits into Mordor and saving Frodo from drowning in the bog, and even for technically destroying the Precious after falling into the fires of Mount Doom while holding it. But he still tries to feed Sam and Frodo to a giant spider monster, so he definitely deserves to be down here.
The precious master's doing.
Speaking of which, next up is Shelob. Do I really have to say much more about this one? She's a disgusting, vile, man-eating spider that sticks people with her stinger and saves them as snacks for later. She hungers for meat that tastes better than the orcs that she eats most often. And if you're looking for more proof that she's a demon, the holy light physically harms her when she looks at it. I know that, like most other monsters, she has to eat to survive, but other than taking out some orcs every once in a while, I highly doubt that she does anything good for the world. Middle-earth would definitely be a better place without her, and for the love of God, somebody kill this thing with fire. Speaking of which, again, Denethor is next. While we don't see much of his governing, we do see that Denethor is a power-hungry tyrant who refuses to bow to the true king of Gondor. It's safe to assume that most of his victories can be attributed to the skill of his sons, and less to his own tactical abilities. As for his sons, Denethor openly favors Boromir to his brother, even when Boromir himself tries to give credit for his victory.
You let the enemy walk in and take it on a whim.
Denethor flat out tells Faramir that he wishes he had died instead of Boromir. So he's a tyrant and a terrible father. What a great pairing. Gandalf claims that he will realize that he loves his son before the end. Unfortunately, it's only a few seconds before the end, after he's already tried to burn him and himself alive. Far too little, far too late. He may not be the most evil, but I would definitely say he is the most despicable. We're gonna quickly mention the Balrog. Balrogs are ancient evils that dwell within the deep places of Middle-earth. We know that this one in particular is responsible for the deaths of many dwarves after they awoke it while mining under the mountain. This is definitely the most intimidating enemy that we see in the films, but luckily, we have a powerful wizard to defend our heroes against this monster of shadow and flame.
Go back to the shadow.
Certainly resilient, and while it falls by Gandalf's hand, the wizard still collapses after days of fighting the beast. Admittedly, its placement this far down more or less comes from the fact that we're told it's an evil being rather than its actions in the story. But come on, just look at it. It's obviously a bad guy. The Bronze Medal of Evil goes to the Nazgul and their leader, the Witch King. They were once kings of men who bore the 9 rings of power, but as we all know by now, never trust a gift from the Dark Lord Sauron. He turns the once noble kings into his dark minions who serve only one purpose: to find the lost ring. The ring wraiths immediately set out for the Shire after torturing the information out of Gollum. Once there, they begin the hunt for Frodo and cut down anyone who even remotely gets in the way. Without the need for any sort of rest, they pursue the ring to no end, losing only to a torch-wielding Aragorn and to Arwen on the opposite bank of a river. Aside from hunting the ring, they also prove to be quite ruthless in battle, taking out several soldiers before Gandalf's magic forces them to retreat. Whether on horses or dragons, these fallen kings fill the air with their horrifying screams. They're willing to kill anyone who gets in their way, and the Witch King even inflicts a wound on Frodo that will never heal. What a jerk move.
Feast on his flesh.
The Silver Medal of Evil is going to the evil wizard of the trilogy, Saruman the White. We didn't know exactly when he turned his back on Middle-earth to follow Sauron, but by the time Gandalf seeks his help, it's already too late.
We must join with Sauron.
After taking one too many trips to the Palantir, Saruman turns on his fellow sorcerer that he's known for years and tries to imprison Gandalf so he can't work against the army of Mordor. After Gandalf escapes, the White Wizard does everything in his power to destroy the Fellowship, including almost bringing down an entire mountain onto our heroes, as well as forcing them to travel into the depths of Moria, where he knows the Balrog will be waiting. Saruman is essentially the facilitator of all Sauron's plans, since the Dark Lord lacks limbs throughout the trilogy. He puts all of the resources he can into the war effort, chopping and burning entire magical forests to create his instruments of war.
Wizards should know better.
Saruman is also responsible for creating the Uruk-hai, a race of brutal warriors and hunters that are much larger and stronger than the standard orcs. He also mistreats his servants so badly that one of them ends up stabbing him in the back, literally, several times. As opposed to the wisdom of Gandalf, Saruman displays great arrogance in thinking that he can share power with the Dark Lord.
The world of men shall fall.
His greed and ambition turn him from a wise sage into a malicious conqueror and drive him to work with the darkest forces in all the lands. So for that, he earns the Silver Medal of Evil. And of course, finally, the Gold Medal of Evil goes to, obviously, Sauron. I think the fact that people call him the Dark Lord is reason enough to consider him evil, but if you want more proof of that, you need to look no further than the One Ring itself. It is a creation of pure malice and wickedness that has the power to corrupt even the most heroic characters, and its purpose is to help Sauron control the other rings of power and dominate Middle-earth.
One ring to rule them all.
Only a being that is pure evil could create such a terrible relic. Aside from that, he's also tried to conquer all of Middle-earth several times with his armies of orcs, trolls, and other monsters, starting wars that claimed the lives of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people. Sauron's minions are also a sign of how corrupt he is, such as the demonic ringwraiths, the power-hungry Saruman, or the bloodthirsty orcs.
What does the Eye command?
He may be the Lord of the Rings, but not even he could withstand the power of our brave and pure-hearted heroes. And that's our list for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let us know in the comments section below. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of the characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. And as always, stay wicked.